Hey, it's Kev on the channel that makes you the real estate expert, and today I'm teaching you the lingo. 5 fancy words made simple. Fancy word number 1, contingency. The word contingency is just a fancy word for if. In the world of real estate, everything has to be agreed in writing, in contracts. And in those contracts, there's a list of terms. And some of those terms are contingencies, meaning that the buyer is agreeing to do something if these contingencies are met. A good example of contingencies are your inspection contingency, your ability to obtain your mortgage or your mortgage contingency. You have a contingency for an appraisal and so on. So word number 1 is contingency, just a fancy word for if. On to fancy word number 2, and maybe my favorite, is fiduciary. The word fiduciary is just a fancy word for representative, or a party that represents another party. In a fiduciary relationship, the fiduciary represents a client and owes that client a duty of care, meaning that they always have to advise and give advice based on what's in the best interest of the client. As a real estate agent, I am a fiduciary to my client, meaning that it's not my job to sell my clients a house, for example. However, it is my job to help my client make a good buying decision based on what's best for them. A good comparison to make is that, for example, an attorney would be a fiduciary, meaning that their job is to give good advice, where maybe like a car salesman whose objective is to sell you a car and doesn't necessarily owe you a duty of care. Fancy word number 3 is escrow or escrow account. The word escrow is simply a fancy word for savings account. Generally, when you're talking about escrow accounts, when speaking about real estate, you're talking about a place, a third party that's holding money to be paid out to someone else. Good examples for escrow accounts are your taxes, your insurance are generally escrowed. When you have a mortgage or your earnest money deposit, these type of things are referred to as escrow accounts. Fancy word number 4 is addendum. An addendum is just a fancy word for change or an addition. You would implement an addendum anytime that you needed to make a change or add something to a contract that has already been agreed to by all parties. An example of needing to use an addendum would be if you needed to make a change, something like the closing date or the purchase price or something like that. However, it's important to understand that any addendum needs to be agreed to, like any other term of a contract, by all parties. And fancy word number 5 is concessions. Concessions is just a fancy word for to give or to concede. The most common use for concessions in real estate contract language is if the seller is conceding to pay closing costs for the buyer or something to that effect. However, concessions aren't limited to only the seller. Anybody can give concessions, and there are countless ways to use concessions in real estate. So there you have it. Those are 5 fancy words made simple. If you're getting value from this content, please like and subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching.